Hey everybody, it's Dr. Ashley, pediatric emergency mom. Happy Wednesday, coming to you live from carpool, which I haven't done in a really long time actually. It's been a minute. So I'm talking today about puberty, which everybody just take a breath. This is by no means everything there is to know about puberty. We would have to have a million Facebook Lives, right? But to just start the conversation and really to encourage parents and caregivers to check in with themselves on how they feel about having these conversations, thinking about the age of your kid, when you should start having these conversations, all of those things. So over the last 20, 30 years, there's been a ton of research done on puberty and the age at which puberty starts. So in the past, 30, 40 years ago, there was quite a bit of research done. And at that time, it was thought that boys' puberty, lower age of normal was 9 to 10 for girls, 10 to 11 for boys. And then over time, what researchers have realized is that those ages have dropped pretty significantly. And so all of the data that's out there really are on white children, Hispanic children, and black children. And so any other ethnicity really hasn't been studied, which is unfortunate because we need data on all of these kids. But what we know now is that the lower age of normal for the onset of puberty for girls is 7, and the lower age of normal onset of puberty for boys is 9. Wrap your brain around that, okay? And so there's certainly ranges, right? So girls may start puberty between 7 and 9, maybe a little bit later, 10, 11. Boys, maybe 9, again, 10, 11. And so there are ranges to all of these things. This in and of itself is a prime example of why it's so important to schedule annual visits with your pediatrician. So your pediatrician should be checking in once a year, full examinations, see where we are with puberty. Are we tracking the right time? Are we really early? Are we late? Just really important for those annual visits. So again, it's deep breaths. The important thing, I think one of the most important things, is for parents and caregivers to have these conversations with their kids. And everybody's going to approach it differently. But if you're not talking to them, they're learning it from the internet. They're learning it from school, from peers, from, I'm telling you, these kids seek information and they are learning things. They have already heard more than I bet you think they've heard, even in younger grades, 2nd, 3rd grade. They're already starting to hear things. And so keeping the conversation open, and telling them, we've told I, because it makes Jack really uncomfortable to talk about this. Sorry, I'm going to throw him under the bus. But telling the kids, hey, this makes me uncomfortable to talk about too, but I don't want you to be surprised with anything you hear at school or anything that's happening with your body or how you're feeling. And so I am a safe person and you can always come and talk to me. And you know what? We don't even have to look at each other, right? We can talk about it in the car where I know we're not making eye contact. We can sit back to back and talk about it. Whatever makes you most comfortable. And knowing the stages of puberty and how kids progress, right? There's a great, there are several great books that are out there, and I can post the links to some of, I think, the better ones. Of course, I've been reading a bit more about boys because I have 2 boys, but there is one called Decoding Boys by Kara Matterson. She's a pediatrician, and it's fascinating. So what she talks about in the book is the girls in puberty we know a lot about it, we talk about it, and you can see them going through puberty, right? You can see the girls getting, fuller hips, starting to develop breasts. But boys, when they start to go through puberty, the first really stage of their puberty is an increase in testicular volume. And that's not something that, you can see. It's not something that we as parents should be examining them by any means. But it's just that for boys, it's something that subtle. And your boys may not even know that this is happening. So especially for boys, it's so important to talk about this early on so they can anticipate like what might be coming next, or what's around the corner, and letting them know that these different things might happen and it's okay to talk about and it's okay to ask you about. So for girls and boys, the American Girl Doll Company, is that American Girl Company, came out with a book on, has a book on girls going through puberty, and Dr. Matterson was one of the editors on that book, and she from years ago said we need a book on boys, and after years that finally came to fruition, and so now there's a book for boys. And so this is the boy book. It's called Guy Stuff, and she even says it's really cute. She asked her son, what would you name it if this was your book? And he said, Guy Stuff, duh. So they left duh out, but Guy Stuff. And it's really comprehensive in a really friendly way that they presented the information to the kids. And what I did is I got this book, I flipped through it, and we've been reading it at night, and we read a couple of pages every night. I've made it very comfortable to talk about, even though it makes me uncomfortable. It's my kids, like, it makes me uncomfortable. But again, I don't want them hearing about things from kids at school or on the internet, because this is when you get misinformation, and things go awry. I have to tell you, this is really funny. So like I said, my husband, Jack, gets really uncomfortable talking about puberty, anything remotely near this topic. And so one way that it's made the boys, I think, more comfortable talking about it is that we like to make dad uncomfortable. So then we'll talk about it in front of him just to watch him squirm, which is, it's nothing bad to talk about. It's nothing dirty to talk about, but it is uncomfortable to talk to your kids about. And so the fact that they think it's really funny that dad gets uncomfortable has led to a lot of really open and honest conversations. When they were younger, probably 2 years ago, is when we first started talking about normal development, about sex, about all of these things. And really the way we started talking about it is we watched a lot of nature shows. We watch a lot of David Attenborough shows, Nat Geo, etc. And so that's the way I framed the conversation, was from the point of what's happening with the animals. When the animals are mating, that's sex, and they're mating to produce offspring, to have a baby. And so from that is how I kind of springboarded into further conversations about sex. And I've let them ask me pretty much any and everything. There's a few things you can imagine that I've just held off for later. I think we can wait on a few things as far as things that are specifically sex related. But for the most part, development, how the mechanics of how things work, and talking about it from an anatomic standpoint and physiologic standpoint, I think has been much easier to bridge that gap. That being said, everybody's going to do things differently, and certainly do what works for your family. But one last kind of thing as far as this part of the Puberty Live, because I'm going to do more on these, surrounds really boys in puberty. And one of the things that's well researched and well documented, and we're not exactly sure why it happens, is when boys go through puberty, they get very quiet. So your previously really talkative boy, you may notice one day just gets really quiet, wants to be in his room alone, not sharing as much, doesn't want to converse as much. And so there's not a link to like a rise in testosterone that causes this, or a certain stage in puberty development in boys that causes this. We're not exactly sure, but we just know that it happens. And one thing Dr. Matterson says, and I agree with wholeheartedly, is that this is the time, even if they don't want to talk, we need to keep talking to them. We need to keep engaging them. It's a time that they need to know they're not alone. We're here and we can talk. And even if they just sit silently, like, that's fine. We're not going to force them, but we're still going to be there and we're going to talk. The old, like, oh, he just wants to be by himself, or let boys figure it out on their own, is really not the right thing developmentally for our kids. I'm going to go back just a second to the earlier onset of puberty for boys and girls. That's another thing. We're just not sure, like, exactly why the age has dropped dramatically, especially for girls. I think it's a combination of things. Environmental factors, is it that we're eating more processed foods, the animals that we're eating, beef, chickens, etc., that have extra hormones, or whatever the case may be. There's a lot of research, obesity as well, particularly in girls, because there's more estrogen in adipose tissue. And so does that play a part in it? It's all like, there's just a ton of data, but all things to consider. And I really just wanted to start this conversation because if you think like, well, my kid's not old enough yet, I don't have to worry about that yet, you might be a little bit behind the 8 ball, which is okay. It's okay to start having these conversations, or start thinking about having these conversations and how you're going to have some of these conversations now. But yeah, so this book, Guy Stuff, and then there's the girl version of this, I think are really good jumping off points. And, yeah, much more to come on this topic. Hope y'all have a good rest of your day.